So welcome to another Photoshop school, and today we're looking specifically at compositing. It's not a thing that I do a lot of as far as for creative reasons. You know, obviously we all work on our own kind of way. However, because we're Halloween just around the corner, I thought it was a perfect opportunity for us to kind of just explore kind of techniques when you are kind of putting things on top of each other or using stock images. The four images in front of us now are basically stock images. We do subscribe to a stock image company, so we can basically go and find stuff like these, and we can go ahead and actually use them. But as far as you're basically, if you're just playing around and you don't have the exact image that you want, obviously it's a perfect excuse to go for a wander with the camera and create these amazing images. Somebody at some stage has done them, yeah? So what we're going to be doing is just looking at some photographs first that I did on a fine art workshop a couple of years ago of this girl. And I thought before we get into the compositing, we'll look at fixing some stuff as it is school again. And we'll just kind of click onto this bottom image, and we'll just launch it straight away. So this is the JPEG from raw file. We've got a couple of little issues, which is the flare or the light at the top right. We've got a bar running across the top here, and obviously we've got a strip box kind of still visible as well and things ready. So a quick fix for this, they can't really be fixed in the raw, even though you could actually kind of fudge it. You'll never get a great result. How I would kind of go ahead and fix these little things to begin with, I would just go ahead and make a quick selection using any of the selection tools, in this case the lasso tool. The first thing I would do is hit the backspace button, which will reveal the fill window, and from the fill window I can select the different kind of fill options, but more often than not I'm using the content aware fill. Just going to press OK to that. Photoshop then is going to gather the information around and will actually start to do a job, as you can see there. Sometimes depends on your feathering. We've got a feather at the top here, so if I set that to 0 and I do the same thing, it'll get a slightly different result because it's not kind of blurring out the edges. So there's all little things that will kind of start to affect the image. Then things like the black bar, you probably don't want to lose it all. So things like the patch tool will allow you to kind of select around the area that you want to affect and then drag it to start a blending process of where it's going to get it from. So again, what we're doing is technically very, very similar to a content aware fill, except we're using the patch tool. So I grab that kind of little foggy area up there and I move the patch tool across. It starts to actually finish what we need to achieve and things really. Okay, so couple of seconds, couple of minutes, whatever your kind of time restraints are. Then as far as this image, if you wanted to kind of add a background effect into the dark or the black instead of what is solid, whether it's a piece of background that you already have or not. So in other words, if we just go down here for a minute and we select the wardrobe or this kind of cupboard that we built, I'm just going to go in now and select the polygonal. And we'll just go down. This creates a straight line, of course. Come back up again. Control key to actually fix the end of the selection, as it were. Control J it, and that will basically make a copy of that panel, as you can see here. And at this stage, depends on what you're trying to achieve. We can basically kind of stretch it, we can kind of skew it a little bit, depends on the Photoshop tool that you're going to use. But if we just want a little bit of the information at this stage, we can start to first of all affect its opacity. Yeah. And then, of course, we can start to affect the blend mode like we've talked about in sessions before. So once we've kind of begun to find how and what we want it to do, at this stage, we can pick up a mask. here just by clicking onto the mask and the layers. B for brush, D for default, X to put white on top to begin with X, and then black by pressing the X tool. So in other words, default colors. And then all we need to go ahead then is actually go and reveal what is kind of that section as such. And obviously if it's still a bit too light or whatever it be, you can just go in. So it's just adding in a little bit of kind of tone or texture to the background. If I want to maneuver that background without affecting the mask, unclick the link between the two, select on the actual layer, Control T to transform, and then just actually start to maneuver it going through it. And again, it's just ways to create yourself just a little bit of texture in backgrounds without a huge amount of work. Next thing I'd suggest is learning the basically new layer from all visible layers. That is Shift Control Alt E. Shift Control Alt E makes a visible layer from all of the visible layers. So any layer that is switched off, it basically excludes. Now, if we just kind of use this layer as an example, let's go in and add a flare from this light up here, like it's a theatrical flare. We're just going to go into Filter and Render. We're just going to go and choose Lens Flare. In this case, we're going to drag and put the lens flare over the visible light itself, and then we can start to actually choose the different kind of lens of flares that we want. In this case, we're going to use the 35mm prime, just kind of boost that out a little bit more. And that's going to kind of start to give that really big kind of the camera blur. This big kind of green spot over the girls isn't very good though. So let's just create a mask. And then once more, remember B for brush, D for default, X to put black on top. And then we start to actually just paint away the effect if we don't want it all, or if we don't want it fully and things really. So again, it's just how we start from an image. So if you go to File and Revert, this kind of is the image before. And then if we just click into the history, and then we select one stop backwards, you can see where we work towards. So again, it's just down to how you want your image to kind of be finished off. So let's kind of just move on now to the kind of the technique of the day. And as I mentioned, we're going to do a kind of a Halloween kind of style of image. So the first thing, let's kind of look at the window, and we just double click that, and that will open that up into Photoshop. So because I've double clicked it and opened it into Photoshop itself, it opens at its resolution and not the image resolution. Okay, so if I dragged it on top of a photograph that I already had open, basically it would go into the free transform, which would be the place kind of command where we can choose what size we want it to be. Let's just go in now and go and find a photograph to go with it. So if we just click onto selected, let's just choose the girl in blue. And in this case, we're going to now overlay it. So we're going to drag her on top of this image and just let go. So now you can see what I was on about. The background image is much bigger in size than the image I've dragged on. Okay, so if what we don't want to do is, because the image of her is technically the main photograph, if that makes sense, what we don't want to do is basically interpolate her, make her bigger than she is in real life. Okay, so in this case, what we're going to do is just switch this haunted house window off, and this is the image we just opened up. If you can see on my screen, this is running about 53 meg, so it's had some crop in RAW perhaps, but it's basically not bigger than basically what it was processed with. So now we want to go ahead and basically drag in that image. So from a folder just off screen here, what I'm going to do is just drag in that image. Remember, we are live, so any questions you want me to answer at the end, then please get them in. So I'm just dragging it in here, and now you'll see we come up with the place command. So this is where it's creating the image to the bounding of the longest edge. In other words, the left-hand edge to the right-hand edge here. And so we've just kind of put this across the top. Now what we need to do is in the layers is we need to start to explore on how we want this to blend or move or whatever it would be and things. So as you work your way through the different kind of blend modes, you're going to see it either start to dominate or start to actually kind of just blend in with the image that is kind of going on here and things really. So I kind of quite like the lighten color. The lighten options here, like the soft light or the hard light, are also going to give us some great effect. And you just need to obviously choose what you feel is going to be the best one for you. So I suppose the question is, what do we want her to look like? Do we want her to look like she is looking through the window, in which case you can see without any other work, we've basically just dragged the window on top, and then anything that is black is beginning to blend with the actual white of the image itself. So even the dark elements of her face here in shadow are starting to blend in with the white of the window at this case, okay? So we've got a really kind of a haunting effect. Remember, at this stage, if I just Control J that to duplicate it, I'll just switch the one off below. And then if I just Control T to make this window bigger, we can start to then play around with a slightly different kind of look and feel. So our silhouette subject still looking through the window is still there. But of course, at this stage, we can move the window around the place and things really. So we've got options to kind of control the look and the feel with it. So as far as kind of the compositing is concerned, the first thing I would try and do is look at the blend effects that can drastically change an image before you do anything else. Okay, let's switch that top image off for a minute. And we'll go back to our main photograph. If we wanted to perhaps use the darkness of the girl in the black of the foreground window here, yes, instead of actually pointing through, let's kind of, first of all, from this layer, we'll make a selection. We're just going to do quick selections for now. So select subject, and the Photoshop kind of intelligence is going to analyze what it thinks is the subject within the image and basically start to make that selection. There's some parts that we need to get rid of. So we're going to just click onto the lasso tool. We're going to hit Alt to the minus to get rid of these little bits. And we're just going to come in now and press the Shift key to add into the part that we've lost. Okay, and we've pretty much got the rest of the girl. Let's just Alt that just by here. And it wasn't very good. Let's keep that Alt just a little bit. Okay, and then we're just going to press the Control J, and this will obviously make a copy of the girl on top. So if I switch on the top layer, of course, yep, she still exists as that original layer, but if I move her up above this image now, we can start to see that she is basically in front and things. At this point, we're just trying to decide on kind of how it works together, whatever it would be. So in other words, if I wanted a slightly ghosty image of the girl as if she's coming through the window or whatever it is, and I got to be honest, I am making this up as we go along now, okay? So basically, if I just Control J the image itself and I move this top one of her slightly forward, I am going to make her just a little bit bigger, which is, as a rule of thumb, no. Yes, and then the image that is here, we're going to make another copy. So remember, either Control J or drag it down to the plus, and that creates another layer. And then this image, holding the Control key, we drag it back, and then basically this is the the background image, yes? So in this case, we want to make this one blur, and we're going to go to Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur. Now, before we do this, if I thought I was going to come back to it and want to adjust the motion blur effect for whatever reason, what I would recommend you do is you turn this image into a smart object as such, yes? Now if we go into Filter, Blur, and we go into a Motion Blur, and we're kind of just giving the effect, so she's coming through the window element, that's okay, press there. And then we just allow it to change the opacity just a little bit more so she starts to blur through. And then we do a very, very similar thing to the girl in front here, but we'd obviously use a different kind of blur. So now we just go right click, convert to smart object, go into Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur again. It depends on how much you really want, of course. And then as far as the main image is concerned, what do we want her? Do we want her on top of all those images, or do we want her beneath all of those images? So in other words, we're making her just kind of blend out, so it just almost kind of merges together. And this is where, of course, it's really just down to what is kind of your styling as such. So I would say at this point, the girl behind, yes, the original, is just a little bit too big in the scene. So let's make a duplicate of that layer. We'll switch the bottom layer off. We'll just go to Control T on this image. We'll make her slightly smaller because she's obviously in the distance. And then at least it kind of works in a little bit more of a realism kind of thing. So as far as the images here, what we've got is composites of these images. We've got a back layer, which is being blended from the top layer because we're using the hard light. Yes, so the silhouette of the girl below is basically just being kind of merged in some way. It's more about the hands, I think, I'm interested in. Then as far as the ghostly images, the movement is concerned, really what we're looking at is, do we want the main the subject, which is the girl in the middle here, to basically be on top or behind the actual blur? That's just down to a personal thing. Because the color, though, is slightly white of this kind of background image, I would suggest that we need to kind of bring all the tones together and the colors. So in other words, it's only the black and white image of the window that really doesn't have the color tone. So at this stage, if we just go in, and from the color palette picker on the left-hand side here, where I click on the black, let's go on to an image and choose one of the blues or something like that. Yes, let's go to a darker blue here, pressing OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill it with that color. Okay, so in other words, that is the control and the backspace. And then what I'm going to do is come down and basically place it above the other image that we can see here. Okay, so it's basically at this point, all we want this image to do is interact with this image. Okay, if I switch it off, you can still see below we've got the other images there. All right, so if I just press the Alt key and I just hover between the dark silhouette girl glass and layer 2, basically it means that this layer is only going to act in exactly the same way. So let's turn this into hard light again. And then we start to change the opacity down. You can see that what we've begun to do is add that little bit of color towards the image itself. Now, obviously, if you decided then to add a overall color to the whole image, that's a different thing altogether. We just go to the top of the stack, create plus, or so, and then obviously kind of fill in the actual color like we just did. Or of course, we can use, if I just delete that for a minute, choosing the top of the stack, go into the layer, and we just create solid color. It remembers what we wanted, And at this stage, we can go ahead and basically change the different dissolve, whatever we want to do. In this case, we're going to go screen. Then we're going to go to the opacity and just change that color overall. And we start to actually end up with a kind of strong image there and things really. So again, all about how we're blending images together and things. Okie doke. So there's our first image. Let me just file, save as. We're just female fine art. We'll just do that horror. Oh, ghost is more like you, in fact. Just going to press save, press OK. And then obviously if I wanted a instant image to kind of use on web or whatever it would be, the first things first, I want to flatten it, or I go file, save as. This time from the PSD, I just changed to a JPEG, and this is Ghost Girl. I'm going to press OK, save. Obviously, I'd usually save around about a 10, pressing OK. And then all we've got to do, send that X, and then basically, if we want to kind of save this off as a JPEG or any other file like a TIFF or whatever it is, flattening the other images gets rid of it. But if you notice up here, even though I just saved it as a JPEG, basically what we're seeing is still the PSD. Remember what I did was save as. All right, so I did save as, and when I did save as, it created the JPEG straight away. If I do it now, file, save as, yes, and I just use the same file name, the Ghost PSD, but it's the fine art. Do I want to replace it? No, I don't. Okay, if I did, it would overwrite all of the actual flattening and everything else with it. So if I turn this now to a JPEG, and I press save, it gives me that other image. So if we come back now into here, you can see what I've got is basically the fine art image that was the original. Here's our ghost. Let's just talk about these images. So we've got the JPEG image that I actually saved as JPEG, but it was still technically a PSD open file. Okay, here's the original girl image anyway, yes, and then basically we've got the JPEG at the top here, which was the one that we saved as when it was the PSD file, and also we've still got our PSD, so an open file. So in other words, if I want to still do more work on this image, it would be the PSD file that I open up. At this stage, let's say I want to Control J the background, switch it on. I want to bring it to near the top of the stack. He says, clicking on the wrong one. Okay, I'm interested only in the lamps, so let's Control T that to transform the actual position, making those kind of big. Then we'll start to use the blend modes to see if there's a natural blend that will kind of give us the effect that we want. So things like the screen or the lighten is kind of doing the job for us and things really. Let's just kind of go through those to begin with to see if there's anything else. There's not going to be, but we're definitely going to work in screen, yes. And at this stage, we can just start to change the opacity down as well and move the image out towards the side. If you find you've got a hard edge like we have here, remember, pick up the actual mask, then go for your brush, B, D for default, X to put black on top. Remember, black hides, white reveals. So in this case, if I just start to actually paint out some of the kind of the image, it'll start to actually just hide little bits with it. And if I make a mistake, I just paint the white back, and then we've obviously got all the information there. So think about what you're trying to do with your composites to actually kind of create the image and everything else with it. Things ready. So again, with or without, I basically think this image should be cropped. I think we should get rid of almost all of the window as such. you'll notice as well at the top, I basically delete crop pixels. Well, in fact, if I click it, I'd lose everything that I've cropped. But if I make sure that this is uncheckered and I double click it, even if I save this as the PSD file, yeah, so even if I save this as the PSD and it's cropped, when I open it up next, if I get the crop tool again, you can see that all the original information is still there. It's all there for me because I didn't click on delete crop pixels. So that's another little tip. However, it will make the file a lot bigger as far as your PSD is concerned and so on with it. Okie doke. Let's close that one down. We don't need to save it. We'll close this image down as well of the girl. Let's go and just choose one of our haunted house images. Let's just go and choose, I think this one here is good. Straight away, I'm going to turn this into a smart object because I want to go in and basically filter blur because it's a background. I want to kind of just blur out straight away with it. Okay, depends on what it's going to do and what we're going to reveal and so on. If you are going to do this though, what I would do is Control J it to duplicate the layer first. I know it's going to increase the file size, which will increase, you know, obviously the processor speed and so on. But it's at this stage, once you've duplicated the layer, then you actually go in and convert smart to object, because from here we've always got the original down at the base. So it's just best work in practice. So filter, blur, and Gaussian blur or motion blur, whichever you want. I'm going to go for, let's go to motion, Gaussian blur. What am I on about? Just take that focus a little bit more. And let's go and get our image. So in this case, we've got some blues kind of going on in here. So if we come back into Bridge, and we just come out and we go and select the raw. If we kind of want, there's a certain image, which is kind of this image here, yeah? But if we want her to be more in that tone of blue, let's bring both of these in for a minute, yeah? And we're just going to go selecting those and then Control R, which means open in camera raw. And then once they're both here, if we basically just go in and we choose a white balance, in this case, if we turn to a tungsten mode, that tends to actually give us this blue, this cold, this night kind of look, where because it was photographed with flash. Yep. And then it depends on how much we need to darken or lighten or whatever it would be and things really. I think she's going to fit quite well in this. I think here, though, she's too bright on the skirt. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and pick up the adjustment brush. And I'm going to just underexpose by dragging this down. Yep, I'm going to start to just underexpose parts of the image. I'm going to go and control the whites down more, highlights as well. Okay, and then what we'll go and do is we'll kind of leave all these edgy bits on the side anyway for a minute. But if I want to just increase her adjustment here, so in other words, if I want to increase the opacity on her, in this case, I'm just going to go in and just lighten and brighten and so on. Let's open these two files up. Now, traditionally, we would save these files, yes, as JPEGs first or whatever it would be before bringing them into Photoshop, because that saves you having to look at what is kind of a file that isn't saved here. So even though the raw file is basically processed into a file here, this file does not exist up at the top. It's still a .cr2, but that's not quite correct. It just means that it hasn't been saved or it hasn't been opened as a JPEG, TIFF, or PSD file yet and things really. Let's go ahead and just drag her onto our haunted house and just see how the color, okay, so the color doesn't match, but what I can do once more is go and pick up the blue, yeah, press in OK, select the background image, pick up the solid color, and start to then basically change the way it interacts with just that image below. Let's just switch her off on the top for a minute. So again, remembering how we kind of add in the differences in the colors, whatever it would be. Now bringing her back on top again. Do I want to select around her? Well, let's have a go to begin with. So just click onto the likes of the quick selection tool, select subject. It does our job. We'll just go and add in a little bit more. Obviously, I could go in and basically use the mask, select a mask tool at this point. Very little reason to do that. Control J, that's going to duplicate her on top. Switch that one off, and now we start to actually see how she starts to blend in. Now, possibly because of the ghostliness and things that we want, that light background is too much. In fact, if we switch that off, you can see the difference already. She blends better here than she did in the past look. So if we kind of want to do a hue and saturation instead of the color, we can either do it on her or we could do it on the scene. Let's do it on the scene. So we click onto that one, hue and saturation. And then all we really need to do is basically change the hue now. And what we're doing is affecting the background layer. And can we get it to the blues that we're actively trying to get to? So not quite as much, but we're definitely into the blue sections. Probably she needs to be a little bit lighter or darker. So in other words, here now we've made the adjustment onto the color from just the girl below. Yes, that's what we're doing. If I want to add in that solidness and the color, it's definitely not going to be screen, is it? We need a darken or a multiply mode. And then at this point, we can just change the opacity to add the tonality in towards the image more. I think so much of the time we spend so much energy really doing all the cutting out and the pasting and so on. But what we're trying to do is actually get to the kind of working image that you really kind of get into before you kind of do the final finish on it. It means that it's kind of a pre-sketch to the end result, so that you can kind of go in and go, well, yeah, I've made her bigger and everything else with it and things ready, but I want to actually do something a little bit more with the light on her face. So it means I'm going to go back onto the likes of the raw file and kind of brighten her up or lighten her up a little bit more. So I would definitely use this as a kind of a pre-sketch or a painting to the finished article when you're just getting going. Don't get frustrated with yourself in the composite or basically the blend modes, whatever it be, because you need to kind of just start to do a little bit at a time. In the same way, if we kind of looked at the alternative image here, so if once more we go into the quick selection, let Photoshop do its job. It's done a pretty good job for now, for at least the kind of the getting going. Let's bring her into here as well. If we are going to make her into the main the subject, and this girl is the kind of the secondary, then obviously she would need to either come in the front of the other girl. So layer stacking and everything else is really what you're looking towards, of how it all kind of fits together. But no matter what you're trying to achieve, more often than not, it's because you're just kind of making it up on the fly like I am now. We don't have a kind of an idea of where we're going. So in other words, if this image is more of a kind of a distance, then she needs to be smaller. Are we putting her behind her as if she's basically beginning to come out? If so, we need to right click, convert to smart object again, filter blur, what kind of blur, motion blur, vertical blur, and how she's kind of coming out from her. And then it's just really beginning to kind of work in the way that you want. But as I said, with all compositing, the first thing to do is worry less about the cutout initially and get the idea of the actual image that you want to create. From there, then decide on how it's going to kind of work itself into your image, and if it's kind of good enough to actually really keep pushing on with and so on with it. Hope you enjoyed this quick Photoshop school. I'll hang around for questions. Thanks for joining me live anyway.